The morning ritual never changed. I would wake before sunrise, make a thermos of black coffee, and walk the short path from my back door to the lake. The gentle lapping of water against the shore welcomed me like an old friend. After 15 years in the Marines and 3 combat deployments, the peaceful ritual of fishing had become my lifeline. My therapist at the VA called it mindful engagement with nature. I called it survival. The Silver Pines community seemed perfect when I purchased the modest lakefront home 6 months ago. The real estate agent mentioned the HOA in passing, describing it as standard for the area with reasonable fees for the amenities. I did not ask many questions. The calm waters visible from my back porch were all that mattered. The rhythmic casting of line and the patient wait for a bite soothed the hypervigilance that had followed me home from war. For the first few months, everything was peaceful. I kept to myself, meticulously maintained my property, and spent my mornings at the lake. Some neighbors would wave as they jogged past. Others would stop for brief conversations. An elderly man named Frank, who lived 3 doors down, sometimes joined me, sharing stories of his own service in Vietnam. "This lake," he told me once, "has more healing power than any pill they prescribed me." That particular morning began like any other. The dawn mist hovered above the water's surface as I settled into my folding chair. The first cast sent ripples across the glass-like stillness. I had just poured my second cup of coffee when I noticed 2 figures approaching along the shoreline. A woman in a crisp white blouse clutched a clipboard to her chest. Beside her walked a tall man with a permanent frown etched into his features. "Good morning," I called out, nodding politely. The woman did not return my greeting. Instead, she glanced at her clipboard. "You are James Mercer at 1478 Lakeside Drive, correct?" I nodded, my hand instinctively tightening around my fishing rod. "I am Patricia Wilson, HOA Compliance Officer. This is Robert Davenport, board member. We have received complaints about unauthorized fishing activities." I looked between them, confused. "Unauthorized? I live right there." I gestured toward my house, visible through the morning mist. Patricia adjusted her glasses. "Section 37, Paragraph C of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all recreational water activities require prior board approval and appropriate licensure." "This is not recreational," I explained calmly. "This is therapeutic, VA recommended. I have documentation from my doctor if that helps." Robert crossed his arms. "Rules are rules, Mr. Mercer. The lake is association property. You cannot simply do as you please." "I am just fishing," I said, hearing the edge creeping into my voice. "Not hosting a regatta." Patricia was already writing on her clipboard. "This is a formal warning. Please discontinue all unapproved water activities immediately. Further violations will result in financial penalties." 3 days later, the certified letter arrived. The fine was $750 for willful continuation of unauthorized water activities after verbal warning. There was small print about appeals procedures and escalating penalties for continued violations. As I stared at the letter, something cold and familiar settled in my stomach, the sensation of being ambushed. The peaceful waters had become contested territory. My therapy had become a punishable offense. I placed the notice on my kitchen table, next to my service medals and a photo of my former squad. The battle I never wanted had found me at home. The HOA rulebook was 273 pages of single-spaced text, bound in a blue plastic cover with the Silver Pines logo embossed on the front. I had received it at closing, but, like most homeowners, had filed it away without reading every line. Now it lay open on my kitchen table, surrounded by yellow sticky notes and highlighter marks. The section about the lake was frustratingly vague. All community water features are maintained for the aesthetic and recreational benefit of residents, subject to board oversight and regulation. I spent 3 days searching for specific language about fishing. There was nothing explicit, just broad statements about approved activities and proper permits. The regulations seemed intentionally ambiguous, designed to give maximum discretion to the board. After 20 years of military regulations, I recognized bureaucratic language designed for selective enforcement. The monthly HOA meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early, notebook in hand, prepared to calmly address the fishing restriction. The room filled quickly with neighbors, most of whom avoided eye contact when I nodded in greeting. I signed the attendance sheet and took a seat in the back row. The board members entered precisely at 7, taking their places at a long table on a slightly elevated platform at the front of the room. Center stage sat a woman I had not met before, her blonde hair styled in an immaculate bob, wearing a bright red blazer that seemed designed to command attention. The placard in front of her read, "Corinne Westfield, President." "Welcome, everyone, to the April meeting of the Silver Pines Community Association," she announced without smiling. Her voice carried the practiced tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Let us begin with the treasurer's report." For 2 hours, I sat through discussions of landscaping contracts, upcoming community events, and a lengthy debate about the appropriate color for replacement mailboxes. When the agenda finally reached open comments, I raised my hand and waited to be acknowledged. "Yes, the new resident at 1478 Lakeside," Corinne said, not using my name though it was clearly written on the sign-in sheet. I stood and introduced myself. "Good evening. I am James Mercer. I received a fine for fishing in the lake behind my property. I have reviewed the bylaws and found only vague references to water activities requiring approval. I am respectfully requesting clarification on the fishing policy and consideration for the fine to be waived." Corinne's smile did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Mercer, the board has broad discretion to protect community resources. The lake is not for individual exploitation. There are proper channels for activity requests." "I am not exploiting anything," I responded. "I catch and release, and the rules do not specifically mention fishing." "Perhaps residents like you need to understand that rules exist for everyone's benefit," Corinne replied. "The board has determined that unregulated fishing poses risks to our waterfowl and disturbs the tranquility of the lakefront experience for others." Robert, the man who had accompanied Patricia to deliver my warning, leaned forward. "If we allow one person to fish without permission, soon everyone will demand the same privilege." I maintained my composure. "I am simply requesting the specific regulation that prohibits fishing, or the process to obtain proper permission." "Board discretion and community standards are not up for debate, Mr. Mercer," Corinne declared, her tone dismissive. "Your appeal is noted but denied. Now moving on to the next item." Walking home after the meeting, I noticed a slow-moving car passing my house. The passenger window lowered slightly, and I caught the distinct shape of a camera lens pointed at my property. The next morning, a new envelope waited in my mailbox, a violation notice for improper storage of recreational equipment, because my fishing tackle box had been visible on the back porch. 2 days later, another notice arrived citing unauthorized landscape modification for the small rock border I had placed around my mailbox. The pattern was unmistakable. This was no longer about fishing or community standards. This was targeted harassment disguised as rule enforcement. As a Marine, I had been taught to choose my battles carefully. This one had chosen me. I opened my laptop and began systematic research into HOA legal boundaries. If they wanted to play by the rules, I would need to know the rule book better than they did. The violations arrived with alarming regularity over the next few weeks. My grass was 1/4 inch too tall according to their measuring tool. The bird feeder visible from the street was not an approved model. The window treatments in my home office did not conform to the neutral palette requirement, though they were simple tan blinds. Each envelope brought a new fine, ranging from $50 to $350. Within a month, the total had reached nearly $2,000. The financial burden was significant, but the psychological toll was worse. Each morning, I found myself scanning my property for potential violations before leaving for work at the Veterans Outreach Center. The peace I had sought in this community was evaporating. The lake that had been my sanctuary now felt like forbidden territory. One afternoon at the community mailboxes, I encountered an elderly woman struggling with her mail. I offered assistance, and she introduced herself as Margaret Thompson, a 10-year resident. "You are the new veteran on Lakeside Drive," she said, "the fishing fellow." I nodded, surprised she knew me. "They did the same to my husband before he passed," she continued, her voice lowered. "He liked to feed the ducks. Karen decided it was against the rules. The fine stressed him terribly during his final months." This conversation opened a floodgate. Over the next week, several neighbors discreetly shared similar stories. A single mother fined repeatedly for having her children's toys visible in the backyard. A retired teacher penalized for planting unauthorized flowers. A pattern emerged. Those who questioned the board or failed to fit Karen's vision of the ideal community became targets for selective enforcement. The revelation that I was not alone brought both comfort and determination. During my lunch break at work, I drove to the county record's office. If the HOA claimed authority over the lake, there would be documentation establishing ownership. After 3 hours of searching property records, I found something peculiar. The original development plans from 30 years ago showed the lake as a separate parcel, not included in the community association property. Before I could investigate further, my phone buzzed with multiple text messages from Frank, my veteran neighbor. "They are at the lake, putting up signs. You need to see this." I arrived to find Corinne, Robert, and Patricia installing a large red sign directly facing my property. "No fishing violators will be fined $1,000 per occurrence." A small group of neighbors had gathered to watch. The strategic placement of the sign, visible only from my back windows, not the general shoreline, made the targeted nature of their actions undeniable. "Is this really necessary?" I asked, approaching the group. Corinne turned, clearly expecting me. "Absolutely. Since verbal warnings and financial penalties have not deterred unauthorized activities, more visible measures are required." "The lake appears to be outside HOA jurisdiction according to county records," I stated calmly. Corinne's expression hardened. "The lake has always been association property. Everyone knows this." "Then you will have documentation showing the transfer of ownership," I replied. "Some people," Corinne announced loudly to the gathering crowd, "seem to believe that military service entitles them to special treatment and exemption from community standards." The public implication that I was using my service to seek privileges hit like a physical blow. Several neighbors looked away uncomfortably. Others nodded in agreement with Corinne. The humiliation burned through me, bringing back memories of returning home from deployment to find many civilians completely disconnected from the realities veterans faced. "This has nothing to do with special treatment," I responded, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. This is about accurate information and fair application of rules. The rules exist for everyone, Mr. Mercer, Karen said with exaggerated patience. If you cannot abide by them, perhaps this community is not the right fit for you. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by property documents, county maps, and printouts from legal websites. The anger had crystallized into something different, a familiar clarity of purpose I had not felt since my days in uniform. This was no longer about fishing. It was about justice, dignity, and standing against petty tyranny. On my laptop, I created a new folder titled Lake Project. Inside, I began organizing evidence of selective enforcement, inconsistencies in HOA claims, and most importantly, the questionable legal status of the lake itself. A plan was forming, one that would require patience, precision, and the strategic thinking my military career had honed. The battle lines were clearly drawn. Karen and her board had chosen me as their target, perhaps expecting me to retreat under pressure as others had done. They had miscalculated. 20 years as a Marine had taught me one essential truth. When ambushed, determine the enemy's weakness and transform defense into counterattack. I would not be leaving, and I would not be surrendering my fishing rod. The county courthouse archives occupied the basement level, a labyrinth of metal shelving units filled with bound volumes and document boxes. The air carried the distinct scent of old paper and forgotten histories. I had taken a personal day from work to conduct proper research, arriving when the doors opened at 8 in the morning. Property surveys from the 1980s through 1990s. I explained to the archivist, a woman named Doris with silver-rimmed glasses and patient hands. Residential development, she asked. Yes, Silver Pines community, specifically focusing on the lake boundaries. Hour after hour, I traced property lines through decades of transactions. The Silver Pines development had been built in phases, starting in 1985. The lake predated the community, originally part of a much larger parcel owned by a farming family named Hargrove. The critical document appeared in a faded folder from 1987, a survey clearly showing that when the Hargrove family sold the surrounding land to developers, they expressly excluded the lake and a 30-foot perimeter around it from the sale. Further investigation revealed something even more significant. In 1993, the Hargrove family had donated the lake to the County Water Conservation District, but the transfer was never properly recorded due to a clerical error. The lake existed in a kind of legal limbo, not private property, not clearly public land, effectively unclaimed due to bureaucratic oversight. I photographed every relevant document with my phone, making careful notes of file numbers and dates. This was the foundation I needed, proof that the HOA had been claiming authority over property it did not legally control. I would need professional verification, however, before proceeding. That evening, I called Mark Stevens, a real estate attorney who volunteered at the Veterans Center. We had become friendly during outreach events, and he had offered legal advice to veterans with housing issues. "This is fascinating, James," Mark said after reviewing the photos I had sent. "The HOA has likely been operating under an assumption of ownership without clear title, but challenging them will be complicated." "What are my options?" I asked. "There is something that might apply here," Mark replied thoughtfully. "There is a program called the Veterans Natural Resources Rehabilitation Initiative. It allows veterans to claim stewardship of certain types of unclaimed or improperly managed natural resources, particularly for therapeutic purposes." My pulse quickened. How does it work? It was designed primarily for agricultural land, but has been expanded to include water resources. You would need to prove three things: your status as a combat veteran, the therapeutic value of the resource to your rehabilitation, and the current status of the resource as unclaimed or improperly managed. Your documentation from the VA about fishing therapy would help substantially. This possibility changed everything. Mark promised to send information about the application process, warning that it would be document-intensive and likely face resistance from the HOA. Meanwhile, word of my confrontation with Karen had spread through the neighborhood. Several residents began reaching out discreetly. Elaine Marcus, a retired high school teacher, shared a folder containing 5 years of inexplicable fines and violation notices that had begun after she questioned the board's decision to remove playground equipment. "It always follows the same pattern," she explained. "Question Karen, then suddenly your property is under scrutiny." Michael Chen, a healthcare worker on the night shift, produced photographs documenting identical infractions treated differently. His garbage cans visible from the street resulting in a fine, while Karen's friend 3 doors down had garbage cans in the same position without consequence. These new allies agreed to document the pattern of selective enforcement. We created a secure online folder where evidence could be uploaded and organized. 23 households eventually contributed, creating a disturbing picture of systematic abuse of HOA authority. The first strategic countermove came in the form of a certified letter to the HOA board. Drawing on state statutes regarding homeowners associations, I formally requested all documentation related to lake ownership, maintenance expenditures, and rule enforcement procedures. The letter cited specific legal requirements for disclosure and established a 15-day deadline for response. 3 days later, Karen appeared at my door. Her smile was tight and artificial, her red blazer immaculate as always. "James," she said, using my first name for the first time. "I thought perhaps we could discuss this fishing situation informally. There has been some misunderstanding." "I appreciate you coming by," I responded neutrally. "But I would prefer to continue our communication in writing, with all board members included." "This approach seems unnecessarily adversarial," she said, her smile fading. "We have always considered ourselves a family here at Silver Pines." "Families communicate openly and treat members fairly," I replied. "I look forward to the board's response to my information request." As she turned to leave, Karen paused. "You know, property values here depend on community harmony. It would be unfortunate if your actions affected your neighbors' investments." The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. I watched her walk back to her car, understanding that the battle was escalating. But for the first time since receiving that first fine, I felt a sense of momentum. The truth was emerging from beneath layers of assumption and intimidation. And truth had always been the most powerful weapon against bullies, whether on the battlefield or in suburban America. The county clerk's office became my second home over the following weeks. Each form I filed represented another step in my campaign to reclaim the lake. The Veterans Natural Resources Rehabilitation Initiative application required extensive documentation: my service records, medical history, and therapeutic treatment plans from the VA. Dr. Sani, my therapist, provided a detailed letter explaining how fishing specifically addressed my combat-related stress symptoms. Repetitive, mindful activities in natural settings have shown remarkable efficacy for combat veterans experiencing post-traumatic stress, she wrote. In Mr. Mercer's case, the consistent access to water-based therapeutic activities has resulted in measurable reduction of hypervigilance and improved sleep patterns. The application process was exhausting but purposeful. Each document I submitted felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been challenged by Corinne and her arbitrary rules. The county officials were surprisingly helpful, particularly after learning about my military background and the therapeutic purpose behind my claim. "This program does not get used much in urban areas," explained Dennis Walsh, the county land management supervisor. "But your case fits the requirements. Just understand that the review process is thorough and can take time." As word spread through Silver Pines about my challenge to HOA authority, the community reaction was mixed. Some neighbors withdrew, avoiding eye contact when we passed on the street. They feared association with what Corinne had begun calling the troublemaker element. Others offered quiet support through small gestures: a plate of cookies left anonymously on my porch, an encouraging note in my mailbox, or a subtle thumbs up when Corinne was not looking. Frank, my fellow veteran neighbor, became my most vocal supporter. "I have lived under her reign for 7 years," he told me. "About time someone stood up." The HOA board called an emergency meeting 2 weeks after receiving my information request. The notice claimed the purpose was discussion of community legal matters. I attended, sitting quietly in the back row with a notebook and recording device visible on my lap. Corinne presented what she called historical documentation of lake ownership, a community newsletter from 1995 that referred to our beautiful Silver Pines Lake and mentioned HOA funds being used for shoreline maintenance. When questioned about actual property deeds or transfer documents, she became visibly uncomfortable, referring vaguely to established community knowledge. I remained silent throughout the meeting, observing the nervous glances exchanged between board members when residents began asking more pointed questions about lake jurisdiction. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Corinne ended the meeting abruptly when the questions became too specific. The following week brought escalation. An anonymous note appeared on my door: "Some neighborhoods just are not the right fit for everyone. Perhaps considering other communities would be easier than fighting established traditions." The implied threat was clear but carefully worded to avoid explicit harassment. Rumors began circulating that property values would decline due to certain elements, disturbing community harmony. Several real estate listings suddenly appeared on my street, suggesting Corinne was encouraging her allies to create the impression of a neighborhood exodus. These pressure tactics only strengthened my resolve. Each act of intimidation was documented and added to our growing evidence file. Meanwhile, my coalition of mistreated residents continued to expand, now including 37 households, nearly 1/3 of the community. Then came the letter I had been waiting for. The plain government envelope contained official acknowledgement that my lake property claim was under formal review. The document included one crucial sentence: "During the review period, no entity may claim exclusive regulatory control of the natural resource in question, and existing access rights remain in effect pending final determination." That evening I walked to the lake after sunset. The "no fishing" sign gleamed in the moonlight, its red letters stark against the white background. I approached it calmly, the government letter tucked in my pocket. With deliberate movements, I removed the sign from its post and carried it back to my garage. In its place, I installed a simple laminated notice: "Lake access under county review, public use permitted per County Code 47.3. The following morning, I rose at dawn as usual. I prepared my coffee, gathered my fishing gear, and walked to my usual spot by the water. The rising sun painted the lake's surface with gold and orange light as I cast my line. For the first time in months, I felt the tension leave my shoulders as the familiar ritual resumed. 2 hours later, a county vehicle pulled up near the shore. A uniformed officer approached, clipboard in hand. I recognized him as Officer Reynolds from the Parks Department. "Morning, sir," he said. "Just confirming status after receiving a complaint about removal of private property." I showed him the official letter. He nodded, made a note, and smiled slightly. "Enjoy your fishing, Mr. Mercer. Looking like a beautiful day for it." As he drove away, I felt the first real taste of victory on the morning breeze. The county administration building stood 5 stories tall, all glass and steel with the county seal emblazoned on the front doors. The hearing regarding the lake property status was scheduled for 9 in the morning in a third-floor conference room. I arrived 45 minutes early, dressed in a dark blue suit with my service pins on the lapel, carrying a leather portfolio containing all my documentation. By the time the hearing officer called the session to order, the room had filled with curious neighbors and visibly nervous HOA board members. Karen sat with Robert and Patricia at one table, alongside a young man in an expensive suit who appeared to be their attorney. I sat alone at the adjacent table, my meticulously organized evidence folder the only company I needed. The hearing officer introduced herself as Elizabeth Morgan, a no-nonsense woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose and 30 years of experience in property disputes. She explained the proceedings would be recorded and established ground rules for presentations. "This hearing concerns the property designation and control rights for the water feature commonly known as Silver Pines Lake," she stated. "Mr. James Mercer has filed a petition under the Veterans Natural Resources Rehabilitation Initiative for stewardship rights. The Silver Pines Homeowners Association has filed an objection claiming prior ownership. Mr. Mercer will present first." I approached the evidence methodically, starting with the original property surveys showing the lake had been explicitly excluded from the development plan. I presented the documentation of the Hargrove family's attempted donation to the County Water Conservation District and the clerical error that had left the lake in administrative limbo. "For nearly 30 years, I explained, the Silver Pines HOA has operated under an assumption of ownership without any legal foundation. They have imposed rules, levied fines, and restricted access without proper authority." I then presented my qualification for the Veterans Program, service records, combat decorations, and medical documentation about the therapeutic value of fishing for my recovery. Dr. Michaels, the Veterans Affairs representative, testified via video conference about the program's purpose and my eligibility. "The initiative was specifically designed for situations like this," he explained, "where natural resources can provide therapeutic benefit to combat veterans while simultaneously ensuring proper environmental stewardship." Karen interrupted repeatedly during my presentation, her composure visibly cracking with each objection overruled by the hearing officer. When her turn to present arrived, she abandoned the measured tone she typically used at HOA meetings. "Silver Pines has maintained that lake for decades," she insisted, her voice rising. "We have invested thousands in landscaping, water quality, and aesthetic improvements. The entire community was built around this feature." "Can you provide documentation showing the transfer of ownership to the association?" Ms. Morgan asked. "Everyone has always known the lake belongs to Silver Pines," Karen replied, frustration evident in her tone. "It is on our community materials. It is part of our identity." "But do you have legal documentation of ownership?" Ms. Morgan pressed. "This is absurd," Karen snapped. One disgruntled resident should not be able to claim community property because of a paperwork technicality. "Ms. Westfield," the hearing officer said firmly, "I need to see a deed, title transfer, or other legal documentation establishing HOA ownership. This is clearly a coordinated attack on our community standards," Karen continued, ignoring the question. "Property values will collapse if we allow random residents to claim community features. Next, someone will want the tennis courts or the playground." "Ms. Westfield," Ms. Morgan repeated with growing impatience, "the documentation, please." "It is common knowledge." Karen's voice rose to nearly a shout. In her agitation, she knocked over a water pitcher, sending it crashing to the floor. Water spread across the table and onto their attorney's documents. "This entire proceeding is a farce," she declared before storming out of the room. The hearing concluded shortly afterward, with Ms. Morgan announcing that a written decision would be issued within 30 days. The HOA attorney attempted damage control, requesting additional time to search for documentation, but the fundamental weakness of their position was now evident to everyone present. 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. The decision was unambiguous. The lake was officially designated as veteran rehabilitation property under my stewardship through the Veterans Natural Resources Rehabilitation Initiative. The document outlined my responsibilities for environmental maintenance and the parameters for public access. The news spread through Silver Pines like wildfire. Former allies of the HOA board suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts for the emergency meeting Karen attempted to call. At the community mailboxes, neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now initiated conversations, often beginning with, "I never really understood why they were so strict about the lake." The power dynamic had shifted permanently, though I understood that winning the battle was not the same as winning the peace. The lake had been reclaimed, but building a truly inclusive community would require healing the divisions Karen's regime had created. That work would be more challenging, and ultimately more important, than the legal victory itself. Spring arrived with gentle warmth and new growth around the lake. Fresh signs now stood at regular intervals along the shoreline, simple, respectful guidelines for lake use under the Veteran Rehabilitation Program. The rules emphasized conservation, quietude, and respect for nature, with specific hours designated for different activities. Silver Pines Lake Veteran Rehabilitation Nature Preserve, open to all residents for quiet enjoyment. Fishing permitted sunrise to 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. to sunset. Conservation and tranquility guidelines in effect. Community members quickly discovered the new arrangement offered more actual freedom than the previous regime. Individual access remained free and unrestricted during designated hours. Children could feed the ducks with proper food available from dispensers I had installed. Seniors enjoyed new benches placed at scenic spots. The most significant change came for organizational use. Any formal group activity, including HOA events, now required permits and modest usage fees that supported lake maintenance and veteran services. The HOA board, now operating without Karen, had to formally request permission for the annual community picnic. Their check for $750, exactly the amount of my original fishing fine, represented the first of many ironies in this new arrangement. I donated the entire amount to the local Veterans Center's therapy program. Karen had retreated from community involvement entirely. Her resignation letter cited health concerns and personal obligations requiring full attention, though everyone understood the true nature of her departure. Her house went on the market within weeks of the hearing decision, and she moved to a gated community across town. Without her divisive influence, neighbors began healing old rifts. The sense of constant surveillance and judgment that had permeated Silver Pines gradually dissipated. People planted more diverse gardens, painted their doors colors other than the previously mandated beige, and allowed their children to play visibly in front yards. The most meaningful change happened on Saturday mornings by the lakeside. What began as my solitary fishing ritual evolved into a weekly fishing therapy group for veterans from surrounding communities. The participants ranged from Vietnam-era veterans like Frank to young men and women recently returned from Middle East deployments. The rhythm of casting lines and quiet conversation provided healing that no medication could achieve. "This is what these places should be for," Frank told me one morning as we watched the sunrise together. "Not power trips and control, but actual community." Even former adversaries found ways to contribute positively. Robert, once Corinne's steadfast enforcer on the HOA board, approached me with an idea for a butterfly garden on the west side of the lake. Patricia, the former compliance officer, volunteered to coordinate a lake cleanup day that brought together residents of all ages. The final symbolic moment came when the county officially recognized the Silver Pines Lake Veteran Rehabilitation Area with a small ceremony. The plaque acknowledged both the therapeutic purpose and the community access guarantee. Standing before my neighbors, many of whom had once avoided eye contact in fear of HOA repercussions, I felt profound gratitude for the journey. "This lake belongs to all of us," I said during my brief remarks, "not as property to control, but as a natural resource to protect and share. The healing I found here should be available to everyone seeking peace." The last fine notice now hangs framed in my home office, displayed ironically beside the lake property certification. Together, they tell a story of challenge and triumph, reminding me daily that justice sometimes arrives through unexpected channels. When I look out at the water each morning, watching neighbors enjoy the shoreline without fear of arbitrary punishment, I understand that the true victory was not taking ownership of the lake, but rather creating a place where healing and community could flourish together. Sometimes the best revenge is not just succeeding against those who wronged you, but creating something meaningful from the struggle, something that benefits everyone, even those who once stood against you. The lake remains my therapy, but now it serves the same purpose for countless others. And that, more than any legal victory, is the justice I needed most.